Fordham here, and today we're going to talk about graphing quadratics. So, probably be important to talk about what is a quadratic. A quadratic is a polynomial of degree 2. And you can always tell the degree by just looking at the highest exponent of each term. So in this first example, there's only one term, but the highest exponent is 2. In the second example here, we have 2x squared minus 1. So we have two terms, but the highest exponent we have of any of them is 2. In the third example, we actually have 3 terms. So we have 1, 2, and 3. But again, the highest exponent is still at 2. A good non-example, for instance, would maybe be something like x cubed minus x squared. Although it's got a degree of 2, the degree for this binomial would actually be 3. So we're looking for x squared or a squared, something with a squared in it. Now, the big question, and the title of this, is how do we graph it? Well, the simple way, make a table. Can never go wrong. Here we have the most basic example, y equals x squared. Very basic, it's very simple. And earlier you may have heard about using the magic numbers when working with a table. These would be -1, 0, and 1. Well, those 3 numbers are usually enough information to give you to graph something, but I'm actually going to have us also check -2 as well as 2. So, to determine the value, all you do is you take the first x value and substitute it in, and that'll give you a y value. So, in this first one, let's go ahead and do y equals -2 squared. Well, when I clean that up, it just becomes y equals 4. And I'm going to continue to do this to fill in the rest of my table. So again, I'll go ahead and do y equals -1 squared, which -1 times -1 is 1. And I can continue to do that for the rest of my table. Once you have your table completed, you can then plot the points and create your graph. So I'm going to start at -2 and go up to 4. Then -1 and 1. Oh, looks like a point at 0, 0. And then 1, 1. And then finish it off with 2, 4. And as you can see, this is very different than linear equations. Remember, linear would be y equals x. It'd have a degree of 1. You can see if I were to connect the lines like this, it actually looks more of like a curve or a U shape. And this actually has a name. It's called a parabola. So whenever you're graphing a quadratic, it's always going to be a parabola. It's going to be this U shape, and it's either going to open up, meaning you can see the U is facing up, or it's going to open down. In the next example, we'll actually see that. So the next example is very similar, except there's a negative in front, and I switched around the -x squared and y. That doesn't make a difference. If it really concerned me, I could go ahead and write this actually as y equals -x squared. It doesn't make a difference in that case. Everything's fine. So again, I'm going to use the same numbers as before and see if it gives me a good graph. So -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. And again, I'm just going to plug them in one at a time and see what values I get. So let's go ahead and start it off with -2. So when I plug it in, I'm going to get y equals negative. Now there was already a negative there. So I always use parentheses when I substitute. You can see there was a negative already existing. So I have to leave that there. But I also have to bring in the fact that it's -2. We all know that -2 squared is -2 times -2. So when I clean this up, it's actually going to become -4. So I'm going to go up to my table and fill that in. Now we can do another point to plug in. So we're going to go ahead and do y equals -1. And when we clean that up, that just becomes -1. So we can plug that in. So that'll become -1. 0 is easy. Again, it'll just be 0 in this case. However, this is where some confusion might come up. Let's go ahead and plug in x equals 1. Now, we should know that 1 squared is 1. But this negative remains, and it's going to actually make the value negative. And in fact, when I go ahead and do it for the next x value, 2 squared is 4, but again, the negative is going to make it negative 4. Now we have at least enough data to plot and to give us an idea of the graph. So I'm going to go ahead and plot the points. So -2, -4. And you may notice something pretty similar to the last graph we just did. And the equations were pretty similar, except they were off by just a negative. But you can see how that negative completely changed how the parabola looks, whereas now it opens down. And this is your introduction to graphing quadratics.